Recording in progress.
March 3rd, 2022, meeting to order at 7:07 p.m. Can I get a roll, please?
Fisher,
Here.
Crew,
Here.
Marzullo,
Here.
Manley,
Here.
Spellman.
Here.
In the audience is Trustee Augustine. I don't know, let's see, is Trustee Swedick?
Trustee Swedick is virtual.
This meeting is being recorded for transcription purposes only, and the written minutes and attachments, if any, will serve as the official record of this meeting. They have now also allowed for virtual participation at meetings, and so we will be able to allow for virtual public comments at this meeting. So on behalf of our virtual audience, we ask that the public joining us in person to approach the podium in the event that they would like to speak. They will need to announce their name and address prior to speaking. Additionally, we ask that the audience to save personal conversation for after the meeting, as additional voices cause confusion for those attending virtual. I'd like to begin by the review and approval of the Zodian Commission organizational meeting minutes from January 6th, 2022. Has everyone had the opportunity to review the minutes? And are there any amendments requested? No? I would entertain a motion to approve the organizational meeting minutes from January 6th, 2022.
So moved.
Moved by Manley,
I'll second.
seconded by Crew. All in favor?
Yes.
All opposed? The minutes have been approved. March 3rd, 2022. Everyone has had the opportunity to review the January 6th, 2022 regular meeting minutes. Are there any proposed amendments to those minutes?
I have one on page 1. Second to last paragraph in the bold, you have a short-term owned rental.
In bold, I'm not.
Oh, yours is not here. A short-term, that's what.
That's not page 1.
Well, it is on mine. Oh, wait a minute.
No.
Sorry, it's page 2.
Okay, now
Sorry.
it's 4.
Did you find it
I
in your
did.
document?
That should be non-owner occupied rental because it's the owner is not present and personally living.
I'm just, yeah.
So we can amend that to say a short-term non-owner occupied rental.
I'm sure you said that. It was just cut off, but that's why.
Oh, thank you for catching that. Are there any other amendments? I'll entertain a motion to approve of the regular meeting minutes from January 6th, 2022 as amended. Moved. Moved by Marzullo.
Second.
Seconded by Spellman. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The minutes have been approved. if there are no objections from the commission, I'd like to skip the old business for now and move into the new business, and then we can return to the old business after the new business. Is anyone opposed? Great. So we've had an application for a map amendment change from R1 to R2 for 1586 Center Road. That is the old elementary school. This process involves the receipt of an application and payment of the application fee. The application's already been submitted and the fee has been paid. So this is where the application is formally received by the Zoning Commission. The Zoning Commission is outlined in the ORC 519, predominantly Section 12. Will receive the application and within 5 days forward it to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will then review the proposal and provide their recommendation, at which time, concurrently with that, I should say, we will set a public hearing to discuss the proposed amendment. Once we've received the report back from the Planning Commission and we've had the public hearing, this commission will have an opportunity to discuss the proposal. Once we've discussed it, we will make a recommendation for the trustees. The trustees will then have set their own public hearing for the proposed amendment, and they will then vote on whether to approve or not approve of the amendment with or without modifications, just as we can make our recommendation with or without modifications or deny the proposal. So I believe that we have a representative from the school district. Mr. Woolney, please go ahead and take the stand. And
thank you. Thanks for having me.
just state your name and
Right.
that's for the record.
Chris Woolney, 2813 Weymouth. That's my personal address, but I am here in school capacity. I do sit on the Highland School Board. We have 5 members. 3 of them live in Sharon, 1 in Granger. And although I do live in Granger, I grew up in Hinckley, went to Hinckley. So I am deemed the Hinckley representative for the school board. So when this situation came up, I don't know how familiar everybody is. Obviously, we have new buildings. The 3 old elementaries, 2 of them were raised or removed. And Hinckley actually has some value. So we decided to put it on the market. And the sort of the thing we ran into was, it's zoned residential. So we looked at tax maps. We looked at what was on the books. I know you guys have access to that. I do have a screenshot here. If I could walk up to the table and share with you guys. Yeah. Okay. It's just the,
Is it just the map?
it's
map?
it's the B2.
Okay.
And the keyhole in that is the school. So that was my only point. That's what sort of drove us to continue this conversation. So asking for a contiguous line, we felt that was at least worth the conversation.
Marcus.
I have it pulled up. So let me see if I can do a quick screen share so that the
audience
those at home can easily see what you're referring to.
And while you're doing that, I'll just speak to the point, what the main driver was behind that. We're responsible financially to the taxpayers, to the townships. We would be remiss in not going after the fact of trying to make it a commercially or part of the business zone when we do sell it to get the top dollar to give that money back to the district. Our fear was we would sell it as is. Somebody would come in and buy it, try to go through this process. And then, we sort of left money on the table, and that's not being responsible.
That is the portion of the map that you're referring to.
Correct. So for those of you in the room, school's right there. And I spoke to Mr. Wilson to kick this off and, filled out the appropriate paperwork, what you spoke to tonight. So that really is the main goal, to utilize that property as a back to the township, back to the district from a taxpayer standpoint. Had it been outside of that red shape or non-contiguous, I don't think we'd be here because that's a hard sell. But really much more than that there's no more point than saying we'd like to get as much as we can for it and not leave money on the table for the taxpayers.
Great.
Any other questions?
If I might,
Yes, sir.
I spent 25 or 6 years, I don't remember precisely, on the Board of Zoning Appeals and several years here on the zoning board. And it's not unusual for somebody to have interest in a piece of property or a building that doesn't fit the narrative.
Mhm.
They generally come here and make a deal with the landowner, in this case, the school board, that they take an option to hold the property while they go through the process to see if they can be accepted for whatever their project is. I don't think this has to be done at this time, period.
Okay.
Someday, maybe that whole thing to the corner will be commercial, but this is not the time. I just don't think it's necessary. There's a lot of other ways, things that can happen.
On the said property.
No, I just think you got to find your buyer. And again, stuff on the corner of the senior house, a lot of these things are all done with contingencies
Right.
until they got BZA and or zoning, depending on who had
Right.
jurisdiction. I don't believe you can't sell this because it's not zone business.
Well, to that point, we hired an auctioneer to either do an auction or a sale. They went out and did their soft calls, and it was appraised for a certain amount, and we're getting about a third of that amount.
Well, again, I still don't.
Right. I'm just sharing what we found
I've
out.
seen people, get millions of dollars for a golf course and that sort of thing.
Right.
And all contingencies done. And yes, it takes a year to go through the process of all the things that have to happen. But nonetheless, the sellers seem to be getting the value for the land.
Right.
But just your own family, for example, for the senior housing, for the drug mart, if that's going to happen, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of examples, and we're just talking about now. Looking backwards in time, I can think of dozens and dozens more.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else?
One thing, I'll go ahead and then I'll just say that, for the zoning commission's discussion, we'll have opportunity to discuss it again after the planning commission has provided their recommendation and after the public comment. So, we'll have ample time to discuss this further once we've had more opportunity to review it.
Yeah, but you'll provide recommendations to the planning commission.
No, and if you look at the map amendments, I pulled up many of the map amendments, and they're not. There's no comments from the township zoning commissions on any of those map amendments.
Okay. Based on the green circle you made, isn't there residential between the school and the B2? There's not. Okay.
There's not legal non-conforming, so there are people who are living in homes, but it's zoned business.
Residential.
It's
They were there
zoned-
before zoning, yes.
Right,
correct.
so they're legal non-conforming
That's
because it's zoned.
But it's zoned B too.
Is it? I don't know.
And then there's neighborhood.
Anybody else?
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Fisher,
Go ahead.
quick remark. So to the point
Make
about,
sure you speak up because we're bringing the microphone.
I was gonna say, pull your microphone.
Sorry about the recording.
it's okay. So with regards then to going in front of the planning commission, you have an opportunity as the liaison between the two commissions to go in front of them, and they should give you the opportunity to speak if there's something that we felt pertinent to their decision-making process. We do have that opportunity. Second comment is
Correct. I won't be submitting comments, so I will intend to attend the meeting.
correct.
Right.
So then, as official receipt of this, correct me if I'm wrong, we have to set the public hearing
And that's
tonight, not for tonight, but set the date.
Set the
for
correct. 20 to 40 days from today,
Correct.
we will have to set the public hearing.
Yep.
Correct.
Thank you.
So I'd first like to entertain a motion to accept the application and forward it to Planning Commission for review.
So moved.
Moved by Krill,
I'll second.
seconded by Manley. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
All opposed? Motion's accepted. I'll now make a motion to set the public hearing for, it'll be April 7th at 6:30 PM. That will be immediately preceding our zoning commission meeting. So when that wraps up, we'll just continue with our zoning commission meeting.
What time did you state?
6:30 is the public hearing time.
On April 7th?
Correct. And again, that's our normal scheduled time, just a 6:30 start as opposed to 7.
Chairman Fisher, I think we didn't meet the deadline for the April County Planning Commission meeting.
Correct. We're going to have to, we still have to set the public hearing. It is going to be an automatic continuation of the public hearing, but by law, we have to have it within 20 to 40 days.
Got it.
And so the public hearing has to be set for that time. Thank you.
So moved.
Moved by Spellman,
Second.
seconded by Marzullo. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's accepted. As Trustee Augustine said, the Planning Commission schedule and our schedules do not align very well right now. So the next filing deadline for the Planning Commission is April 4th. And that meeting of the Planning Commission will take place on May 4th. So while we were required to set a public hearing, that public hearing will more likely than not be continued because we will not have had the staff report or the comments from the Planning Commission until our May 5th meeting. So the Planning Commission will vote on the proposal on May 4th. We'll likely receive a final document stating their approval, conditional approval, or denial on May 5th, and we'll meet on May 5th for a second public hearing, as well as our meeting to discuss and potentially vote on the amendment. Perfect. Mr. Looney, you're welcome to stay if you, otherwise I think we've wrapped up. All right, I'd like to move on to old business, which is short-term rentals. I have printed off somewhere. So we've been working on this for a while now, and I tend to prefer putting pen to paper, coming up with something, and then working on it as we deem, as we deem fit. And so I've provided to you in advance, and then also you're getting a copy of it now. Some language that I've started to work on in addition to the definitions that we had already discussed. And then I also provided to you the regulations from Peninsula, which was one of the areas that we had looked to for guidance as to some of our language. And so taking a step back and looking at what we've done so far and the public comments that we've had and the comments that I've heard from this commission, my impression has been that we would like to see something in the books, but we don't need to have significant regulations in this area. It's more to provide some sort of notice and control to potentially the zoning commission and as well as guidance for the community. And in fact, in January, Inspector Wilson did receive a call from a resident, from a person inquiring about whether if they purchased a home in Hinckley, they could use it for short-term housing. And that's a great question. And I actually spoke with the prosecutor and tried to understand where our current regulations are and whether a short-term dwelling rental is permitted, whether a B&B is permitted in our residential district. And he really said, it depends. It's going to very much depend on the situation at hand. And so I think that it's behooves us to at least look into this more, to maybe put something in our books to start to give some guidance. With all of that said, I will say that there is a House bill currently in committee that would take away much of the township's rights to regulate short-term housing. So depending on where that goes, we might work through all of this. And then even before we move forward with the text amendment, the House the Ohio Assembly might take that from us, or we might get it into books if we so choose, and then shortly thereafter we might have to remove it from the books. So we don't know what that's going to look like, but that is pending in the Assembly in the House. So with respect to the definitions, I've kept the definitions, and I'll read them out in a moment. I've kept the definitions very similar to what we have already discussed. The only thing I did is changed it from a home rental to a dwelling rental, because I found that was more consistent with the language that you see elsewhere throughout the book that refers to dwellings instead of homes. So we have two definitions currently. We have a short-term and again, dwelling rental, and that's any dwelling that is rented in its entirety for not more than 30 consecutive days by persons other than the owner, from which the owner receives monetary compensation, and the owner is not present and personally living on the premise during the time of the rental. We also have a definition for a short-term owner-occupied dwelling rental, and that is any dwelling of which a portion is rented for not more than 30 consecutive days by persons other than the owner, from which the owner receives compensation. The only recommendation that I have to these amendments, based upon the feedback we've received so far, is, if you remember, Mr. Burns came up and he said he found it problematic that we said other than the owner, because perhaps the owner is a trust or an organization, and so there is no owner that's a person per se. And so I think that that's a relatively easy thing to potentially resolve by saying an owner or a legal representative of the owner. And therefore, if it is owned by a trust, there's obviously some legal, there's some person that's a legal representative of that trust. Is there any feedback on the definitions?
I think we're making an assumption that every home is owner occupied. When we're saying the short-term owner occupied dwelling, if someone is renting a home and wants to rent out one room, are they precluded just by basis of them being a renter?
Do you have a suggestion?
And other than the owner, but other than the primary occupant, I don't know if occupant's a better word than owner.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
What was your concern? Can you explain?
So if someone's renting a home for a year and people want to come down for fall foliage or something like that, or Buzzards Day, and they want to spend the night, can they rent out a room?
Sublet or whatever you call it.
Yeah, basically sublease.
Yeah.
For a short period of time.
Yeah, for a short period of time that doesn't actually require a lease agreement. Because I don't know that there are a whole lot of rental contracts right now that are also covering, okay, you cannot use it as an Airbnb, or you can't.
Well,
subrent.
Except for, I think most rentals say that you can't sublease.
But that's what I'm saying. So a sublease versus using it as an Airbnb. Are you actually subleasing, if you're in it, A, But B, if it's also for a weekend, is that truly a sublease? I don't know. That's why I posed the question. I don't have the answer. I'm just wondering if it's something that precludes other people in the community. Because again, the entire intent of having the conversation is to provide the definition, not to put in limitations.
Correct. Right. And this only would apply to the short-term owner occupied dwelling because that's the only one where someone else would be present, right?
Yep.
Right. But it's on the premise that the actual dwelling is already being rented by someone.
Mm-hmm. But it's a long-term rental, so
Correct. It's a long-term rental.
It doesn't actually fall under this category.
It doesn't fall under this category.
But then,
Correct.
because it's already rented out,
Can they then
I
rent
mean, ostensibly the person is already renting it. They're paying to have complete use of the building, no matter how they want to use it.
So your suggestion, it sounds like might be just to strike owner and amend owner in both places to be primary resident.
Yeah.
Again, this is just a working set of definitions that we're going to table and then advance potentially to planning commission along with a packet of text amendments at some point in the future.
Mhm.
I don't, my only concern with primary is, it for 1 week is a person a primary resident and then that person goes away and there's another primary resident. So whoever rents that unit for that period of time becomes the primary resident. But that might
But
be.
then if they were to do that, then that becomes a short-term rental.
Right.
And it would be a short-term dwelling rental at that point, because every week it's switching over to a new renter.
Right. I'm okay moving it to primary resident again for now and seeing what legal has to say about it at some point in the future. Any other comments on the definitions?
Who was this one from?
Peninsula.
Peninsula.
And part of the reason we use Peninsula is because one, that they have a pretty robust regulation, and two, they're somewhat, although they are a village, they are somewhat similarly situated in terms of very close to the national park districts and would likely attract the same sort of renters that we would have here for short term.
They use the word owner in their definition,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Doesn't mean that we can't write something better.
very true. Very true.
If there's no other discussion with respect to the definitions, I would like to move into how we would amend the text potentially to factor in short-term dwelling rentals and short-term owner-occupied dwelling rentals. And so what I've at least initially recommended is that in the 6R1 district, so it's 6R1.3, we would add short-term dwelling rentals and short-term owner-occupied dwelling rentals as conditional uses, which means that they would have to submit a request to the BZA for review, at which time BZA would then be able to look at it, consider the conditions of that property, decide whether they want to impose any conditions upon that use, and then approve or deny of that use. And likewise, I've made the same proposal for the 6R2 district, which would be in 6R2.3. We would add a K and an L for short-term dwelling rentals and short-term owner-occupied dwelling rentals. So I guess the big question on with respect to this is, at least currently, and again, this is only a working set, a working template for us until such time as the steering committee has completed their task of the comprehensive plan audit, and then we review several of these different proposals for forwarding to Planning Commission.
If I could ask kind of a question too. My involvement with the zone of BZA, we were led to believe that once a conditional was granted to a property, it went with that property forever.
As long as they continue to use it.
Well, so the property sold, then the next person has the right to do the same thing. Are the real estate agents going to explain to them, if you could do this, but here's what you have to do? Or are they just going to say, hey, you can do this too? I mean, we're creating, we got to think about all the issues we might be creating.
So that was actually the first question that I was going to ask is what's the time basis for a new application? Because once they apply and if the BZA approves it, once someone moves out, they use it for a weekend after it's been approved. How long is that going to be good for? Is it in perpetuity?
We were led to believe that once the conditional went, it followed the property. Because one time we had an arrangement where if it was whatever it was the condition was given for wasn't enforced over done over a 2-year period, or if it changed to some other one from a printing company to a gas station, ridiculous about it, that would change it. But otherwise, if the basic conditions stayed the same, then it went with the property.
And you're correct, but if the person or ceases to use it for 2 years, the condition goes away. And I'll try to find
our regulation.
Let me
I
see.
guess the state permits some kind of arrangement that if it's not used for 2 years, it goes away.
I'm pretty confident that we have a 2-year because actually we just did this with the daycare, adult daycare. They had a conditional for a license for a bar,
Right.
and their liquor license has lapsed, and it lapsed more than 2 years ago. So a letter was just sent to them to notify them that the conditional.
See, the situation changed.
And that's what I'm saying. If the situation changes, if someone stops using the property as a rental for a period of 2 years, that conditional
So
use.
where would I find that? And I'm not going to go looking for it. Is it in the state?
That's what I'm looking for right now.
Okay. Because we were told a long time ago that it went with the property, end of story. And here's the only way that these things can change. So be careful about conditionals. And this may never happen. I just raised the question.
Are we only having the short-term rentals in the R districts and not in the B district?
We'll get to that.
Yeah, yes, that is a conditional.
Marcus, we don't have to solve that right now. We can.
Well, while you're talking, I'm certainly willing to see if I can search for where that might be.
I can't recall where it is, but I definitely remember the 2-year limit.
There was at one time. Yes, absolutely there was, but then it was lifted from us.
I thought that was taken out at one point though, or was deemed not legal.
Well, we got into a battle over conditionals and variances too. And where that all got, sorted out, I'm not sure. I was getting ready to leave the board.
I can't find it right off the bat.
Wait, that's fine. It's again, this is just a general discussion at this point in time.
Right.
But it'd be great if it was a 2-year. If nothing happens for 2 years, it's null and void. I think that would give us a great amount of protection.
How do you prove it? How do you enforce it?
Well, the way our rules are enforced is when somebody complains. But hey, a good example is no one was living in the 8th building over here, and then all of a sudden these guys take it over. It was well over 2 years that they redid the apartment, so.
It's a fair question. I'll look, and then, again, we're going to revisit this again. So outside of that, are there any concerns with making those conditional in the residential districts?
just the general concern that I noted a moment ago, which is how are you going
How
to
the
enforce this?
enforcement, yeah.
Why do this if we have no ability to enforce it? The police chief himself stated, don't get me into this. I got enough things I'm busy with. I think it's good to have the definitions. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know.
So do you think that we should kill this off altogether right now because of the enforceability of it? When I look at the zoning resolution, I think that a lot of these items are complaint driven. I think that there's going to be challenges with enforcement of a fair number of these regulations, but we still provide them on the books so that the zoning department and the township has an opportunity, if something happens, to respond effectively, or at least have options to consider, and at least be able to take it to the Medina County prosecutor and say, here's what we've got. What are your thoughts? If we don't have anything on the book, I don't know how much ability the township has to respond to an incident. And then once the complaint's been filed, it's almost too late at that point for us to make amendments.
I wouldn't recommend that we kill it off. I think it's our duty to do our due diligence and seeing if this is something, beat it up from every angle that we can, and then make a decision. At that point, we've done our due diligence. Is this something we think we should pursue? And I don't think we're there yet. So
One of the things you might, and this is way ahead of it, used to be when we issued a conditional, we could do it for a stated period of time. And then we've had the zoning inspector prior to that running out to go check on the situation and make sure all the conditions that we had added to the conditional were enforced before they came back in front of us before the hearing for them to renew it for some period of time. And now that the law somewhere along the line changed that they're indefinite. But so maybe it's somewhere similar to that, but every once in a while, that maybe they have to be licensed every 2 or 3 years, and the zoning inspector is going to have to check on it that they're following the rules and regulations and do a little bit of work. Or at least have the language that would be there, may not, again, because we have a lot of zoning stuff that's not enforced in the township for varying reasons.
what's the House bill? Do you know the number off the top of your head? Do you know that?
I don't, but Gmail me. Let's look.
I have part of an HB.
You said it's still in committee, right, Marcus? What's that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
HB 563.
562? 563. Thank you.
It's at the second hearing within committee.
I'm all for the definitions. I'm not sure I'm for the conditionally permitted uses. But that's why I welcome more discussion. I even looking at, if you look at Peninsula, they didn't, their regulations are much more complicated as far as there's quite a bit to it.
Mm-hmm.
But they're allowing them everywhere.
So
They don't say where you can have them or that it's a conditional. They give you what you need to do, you know, their taxes, the certificate, this and that, but they don't, it's not regulated like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm,
You think it should be permitted use then?
yeah. So I'm kind of,
And again, I mean, I think that goes back to the initial intent when we brought this up was, okay, we need to define it, not limit it.
right.
And I know there was concern of, okay, well, are you going to shut down this capability? No, not at all. I just need to know that, all right, it's on the books as something that if we need to limit in the future, which is unlikely, but possible, we can.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to agree that it's a permitted use if you own your property. But it should be defined as to what it is.
Right. I definitely believe we need definitions. So I'm for that. Just not sold on the conditional uses.
That's fine. So I put it as a conditionally permitted use just so that the township had some check on it. Also, when you look at what is allowed within residential districts, most of what I would say are commercial type of operations in a residential district are conditional. And so likewise, short-term owner occupied was a bed and breakfast effectively is what we were looking for as an example of that. And so that's much more of a business type operation. And so should we group it with the other business type uses within a residential district? So those were the two reasons that I thought maybe it made sense as a conditional, is because it's more of a business type of operation, and also as an opportunity for the township to see what's happening in advance of it happening and potentially provide some safeguards, especially since you'll notice that I did not, and we'll discuss this when we get there, I did not include any sort of notice requirements within the regulations based upon the chief's comments.
Perhaps we tackle just one of those, the bed and breakfast, so the owner occupied and not the other.
And that's, you can absolutely make one of them a permitted use and one a conditional, or we can, that's absolutely an option. That's why we have these two definitions, is to provide us flexibility as to where we put them.
Chair Fisher, I have the discontinuance of use section. Do you want that for your reference?
Sure.
Let me move up to the microphone.
Melissa Augustine, Hinckley Township trustee. The discontinuance of uses section 8.3.d, voluntary discontinuance of the nonconformance use of a building, part of a building, lot, or part of a lot for a continuous period of 2 years or longer shall constitute voluntary abandonment.
Thank you.
Thereafter, any use on the premise shall conform to all regulations of the district in which the building or lot is located.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you're saying the point in having it as a conditional use is that we can get safeguards in place and advanced knowledge of what's going on.
Correct.
But we've heard that we can't enforce zoning regulations as it is, right?
We
can
enforce them.
But the point being, if someone's going to use it as a short-term rental, and it's truly a short-term rental, someone's there a weekend, we're not going to find out and won't be able to act until a month later, at which point it's a moot point because it's no longer being utilized.
I think that that's true if it was a one-off. If it's a continuation, so it's a short-term rental that's being continuously listed on Airbnb or VRBO. At some point, again, depending upon the severity of the condition, the township would have the option to seek an injunction to stop that action from taking place. So I agree with you if it's once every 4 years, and quite frankly, I'm not so sure that person would even come in and get a conditional, even if we do require this conditional. But for continuing operations as a short-term rental or as an Airbnb or as a bed and breakfast, I somewhat disagree in that. I think that we could have enforcement options available to us if needed.
But I would say with the short-term rental, you got no hopes of enforcing that. Bed and breakfast, no hopes of enforcing it on a short-term rental. A bed and breakfast maybe or owner-occupied. Let me correct myself. An owner-occupied is a little bit different. That person's running a business right? They have a more vested interest in being compliant because something like that is ongoing. So it may, like I said, it may be worth tackling half of the equation. And
Well, but to that end, short-term rentals that are not owner-occupied would certainly be a possibility, and it would definitely be a business to be done on a routine basis.
If someone is intending to purchase a home in Hinckley for the purposes of short-term rental, which is just what a person inquired about in January, that would be basically a commercial operation in Hinckley.
sure.
But it's not defined as such.
Correct.
Yeah. And then, so to Bill's point, is that something that we can or can't enforce? Now, I think we keep hearing that we can't enforce it, but if there are enough complaints, we find a way to enforce it. That's how the zoning commission, how the zoning office has worked forever. When there are enough complaints, we do something about it. And so, I mean, I feel like we're kind of dancing on both sides of this. We can't enforce it, and so we shouldn't define it. But then we should define it, and we'll find a way to enforce it. And it seems very muddy right now.
Oh, it's super muddy. It's super muddy, and we're definitely dancing on both sides of that.
Which, I mean, honestly, we should. We need to look at it from every single angle. But I think the worst thing we can do is just say, throw up our hands. There's a bill in committee. We might not be able to put this through, and it'll get pulled off the books anyways.
So I want to go back to, again, I don't even know if the steering committee is going to do anything, have any survey questions or anything that relates to short-term housing. So I don't know that we'll see any guidance as a result of the audit to the comprehensive plan for this, but we will at least revisit it after the comprehensive plan audit has taken place. So at least for now, in the interest of continuing to move forward, I just want a general pulse as to on this commission as to where we want to put the short-term dwelling rentals and where we want to put the short-term owner-occupied rentals. Do we like them both as potentially conditional for now and then revisit it again once the audit's complete, or are we leaning towards making short-term dwelling rentals a permitted use? And it sounds like, at least my impression is, owner-occupied dwelling rentals were more in favor of a conditional at the very least.
I'd like to continue exploring it, but first I want to read up on this House bill and see what's included in that and how imminent or non-imminent it is to drive this. My preference is to what Mr. Marzullo said. There are situations where a short-term rental itself could be more than a transient, one-off type thing. What I think when I say it's non-enforceable, or we would struggle to enforce it, is for those that are transient, those that are, a weekend here, a weekend there, whatever it may be. So kind of with that in mind, maybe go back, do a little more research here, dig in. But as far as are they conditionally approved or not, I don't know. Personally, I don't know. It feels like the owner occupied has a place. At least starting with that one. That's kind of my opinion.
So my hope is that we get this tightened up enough that we feel comfortable with stopping on this and moving to something else. So that my hope is that at the end of this meeting, we'll reach some resolution as to where we want to kind of lock this language in for now to revisit then after the planning or after the steering committee has provided their recommendations. And the trustees have made any amendments as they're going to make.
I think the definitions are pretty much locked in. I think we're okay with the definitions. I think we're just struggling on the usage.
Okay.
And And I, for one, am still not sold on a conditional permit. So,
And I think that that's something that's relatively easy to move around once we revisit this, because it's a simple
Right.
strike through of it from
Right.
conditional, put it into permitted.
but I like that you identified all the areas that should come up in the zoning. That's very helpful.
Okay. And then likewise in the business district, again, for now, I've designated it as a conditional use for both short-term owner-occupied dwelling rentals, which would be the bed and breakfast type, and the B1 and B2. Notably, short-term dwelling rentals are not listed here at all in the B1 or B2. Part of my motivation for that is because dwelling units in the business district are only permitted on the second floor. So we could consider making short-term dwelling rentals a conditional within the business districts. But if we do, I would suggest that we keep it to the second floor or higher to be consistent with a dwelling unit in the business district.
I can understand that.
And I should say a dwelling unit is only permitted on the second floor or higher in the B2 district. It's not even a conditional use within the B1 district. So again, do we have any thoughts on that? I'm okay also just waiting and tabling the discussion on that section for after the comprehensive plan, because again, that's something that's relatively easy to move around as we see fit once we've heard back from the comprehensive plan audit. Mr. Marzullo, anything you're deep in thought? Or maybe you just want to look like you're deep in thought. I'm not sure.
It's always a question with me. I think we might want to continue moving forward with the definitions and then the subsections, whether or not it's conditional versus permitted. That's really what we wait on from the audit. Dave, you know whether or not the steering committee is even addressing any of this. Are they?
No.
No?
No.
So,
We're simply addressing pretty much what's there.
so really it kind of comes down to what's the point in putting off for the audit if it's not even going to be brought up?
Well, part of the reason is I don't think we'll, unless this commission disagrees, I assume that we'll put together a package of text amendments to push forward to the commission. And so
totally
we want
agree.
to
Yeah.
hold off on those other ones until afterwards. So
And that's why I'm thinking if we knock out this entire section, and we're going to have plenty to do once that audit's complete.
Right.
And I'd hate to push this off until the audit's complete and say, oh, we got no information on any of this in the audit. So now it's just one more thing on top of everything else we have to address.
So what other information, so if I set this as an agenda item on our next meeting, what information do you need to decide whether you want to make it a conditional or a permitted use or neither in various districts? Because I think that that's where we're at right now, is we're not sure what we want to do yet here, but I don't know what information we're going to glean by the next meeting to change that, other than Mr. Spellman looking at the House bill. And
Generally speaking, I think just our conversation and discussion about it is where we decide, all right, yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't make sense. It's not about additional information that's available. Really, this comes down to something where, okay, so is it something that we need to have right next to every other house in the township? Is it something that needs to be conditionally permitted? Keep in mind that anything that's conditionally permitted, by and large, is going to get approved because they're not going to put undue conditions on it or too burdensome conditions on it. So if someone applies for it and it's a conditional approval, it's an additional step. It's not in any way limiting whether or not it's going to exist.
And that's part of why I was okay with making these conditional, is because I don't think that that's a substantial undue burden on a resident. And again, they should be extracting some revenue from this. So I think that the cost would be minimal to seek a conditional use.
And then in my mind, what I'm thinking is the example you brought up of someone calling saying, hey, I'm going to buy a place and just use it strictly as a short term. And how's that not a hotel?
And we'll get into that, because with an owner occupied in particular, you'll see that I've tried to work through some language to limit the size for that very reason. I'm just, we've had probably 3 or 4 meetings that have been focused on short-term rentals at this point. And so I'd like us to reach some level of conclusion to move on to other items. And, I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other as to whether these are permitted or conditional uses for some of these items. I just would like us to reach some conclusion, either this meeting, or if we need to have one more meeting on it, we can. But I would like to avoid extending this out too much further and start tackling other items.
Is there anybody that thinks they should be outright permitted uses?
I do.
Michelle?
I do. I don't, what is the purpose of the conditions? Just to track them? Is that it?
With the conditional, well, there's a bunch of things that might happen. First of all, normally the BZA would go out and inspect the place, and they might find things that you didn't see on the paper, so that somebody's looked at. So you've got another set of eyes looking at the situation. And if the conditions as they agree to at the hearing aren't met, they can pull that conditional. I appreciate if it's a little more complicated than that. You just don't have to go through a court thing. But so you've got that extra protection.
Protection. So what is your fear of something happening? What
if there's a fire and they forgot to put their smoke alarms in? Who's responsible? We personally.
And if the
fire department should.
Well, I'm just saying, if a homeowner forgets to put their fire alarms,
it's an individual, but we're talking about a business. So
but somebody owns that property, so they're responsible for it, right?
Yeah.
And so that person,
But if we're talking about bed and breakfast, it's a business. It's strictly a business. So
it's not strictly a business. It's usually somebody's home.
Or not, but it is a business. And they check every business every so often in the township.
Okay. I'm just,
I hate to see more regulations too. This short-term non-owner occupied, I'd pretty much ignore it. Other than just to mention it can be here, but it only can be here and B1 or B2 or however people decide. But as far as the bed and breakfast type of approach, I don't see it any different than any of the businesses we have in town.
Okay, so you're viewing it as a business, but you don't. But you don't view a short-term house rental as a business.
Well, but it's less than 30 days.
Correct, but I'm turning it over every 29 days, 28 days.
That could be too.
Is that a business or not?
On the surface, it would appear, I agree.
Okay. So then that's why, I can't separate them. I know you guys keep trying to separate them. I can't, because they're really very similar. They're both operated as businesses.
Okay.
One, the owner lives there. One, the owner does not. So I'm just, that's where I'm at with the permitted versus the conditional. I don't see why there's the conditions being placed as an, and you can convince me differently. I
think your point is well taken for the person that does this 50 times a year.
And I don't even know if Hinckley has short-term rentals. I'm sure they do.
I think we had somebody tell us.
And I believe, I'm sure they do. And I don't know if anyone in Hinckley has a bed and breakfast. There might be. But I'm just saying the permitted and the conditional, those are, I think I would need to digest them before I really take a stand on one or the other. I'm very happy that Marcus put them in residentials, because one other time he was putting the bed and breakfast in just a business district. So I think after you read Peninsula, maybe that convinced you. I'm not sure.
Well,
so I was very happy you did.
One of the reasons that I think that we should allow bed and breakfast within the residential districts is, we have to look at what's going to happen with farms that are potentially 20 to 30 acres, and how do we preserve that as large blocks of land as opposed to subdivisions. And so those properties have to somehow be able to generate revenue. And so one of the comments I made last time, and I think Mr. Spellman responded to me, is, would you rather have a subdivision immediately next to you, or would you rather have a bed and breakfast? And I think many of the people within the township would like to have a bed and breakfast within the right next to them. So
that actually led me to what you have on 7.5A.
Let's hold, because I haven't even read these yet.
Oh, okay.
That's, yeah.
But you understand where I'm going. When you've got a 20-acre farm, you've got a barn that you could make very nice and comfortable. And why would we?
So should we move? Let's move there and
disallow that.
So what we'll do is I'll read the rest of these. If there's any additional comments, we'll talk about those now. I'll put it back on the agenda for the next meeting. At the next meeting, I'd really like us to get a conclusion to this that we feel comfortable with, stopping at that point to then wait to make a movement with a text packet, if that's okay with you. So what I've suggested is, and this is in section 7.5, which 7.5, and again, this goes back to assuming that we make the properties conditional uses, because chapter 7 deals, I believe, with the conditional zoning certificate, which would be required if you have these as conditional uses. If you do not have them as conditional uses, we'd have to look at this language and decide whether we want to put it elsewhere as opposed to in the conditional use section. So what I've suggested is in section 7.5, which is supplemental regulations for certain uses, we would add an I, short-term dwelling rental. So this would be the Airbnb type of rental, not the bed and breakfast. And the regulations that I've so far suggested is that no renter shall be permitted to sleep in an accessory building in section 6R1 and 6R2. So in the residential districts, renters can't be in an accessory building. No renter shall be permitted to sleep outside or in tents, campers, or other similar temporary structures. So you couldn't put an RV on your property and rent that out. The maximum number of renters to be accommodated shall be equal to the number of bedrooms occupied by renters multiplied by a factor of 2. So that's just a regulation on the number of people that can be in the dwelling. The owner shall retain and upon request make available to the township zoning inspector or law enforcement officials records to demonstrate compliance with this section, including but not limited to the primary residency of the renter, the name of the renter responsible for the reservation and or who rented the unit each night, dates of the rental, and duration of the stay in the short-term dwelling rental. It's very similar to the requirements that are being advanced for senior housing in the sense that we need some way of checking what's happening on these properties. And so that last limitation is just for us to see what's happening on the property. So should the township or law enforcement make a request for it, it's not something they have to furnish automatically to the township. So the township doesn't have to keep records on it unless the township so chooses at their option to do so.
What would I would recommend putting in a time frame
That's fine.
of how long they have to maintain those records.
That makes sense. Perfect sense. And so I think if we look at these each individually, item A, which was no renter in an accessory building. The reason that I put that one in there, and I think that there was something in the Peninsula one that was similar to that, it has to do with you could essentially have two different rental homes on the property. And so if we only allow it within the primary dwelling, then we don't have to worry about whether someone is building a bunch of cottages on their property and renting out each one of those individually as a separate unit. That was the thinking with respect to why we would have a limitation like item A. Item B, again, it's so that they can't set up some sort of tents, campers, and then rent those out. Item C was, I don't know if it's necessary for the short-term dwelling so much as maybe the bed and breakfast, but it was just to try to limit the number of potential occupants on the property at one time. And then item D is a record-keeping requirement. Peninsula had extensively more requirements. And again, I don't think that we need to impose too many restrictions on what people can and can't do on their property. I was just trying to come up with some reasonable regulations. And maybe other people think something reasonable is not the same as me, which is fine.
So the accessory building, if the barn is in Peninsula, it would be permitted as in the accessory building. If the rental unit is within the accessory building, it shall provide bathroom facilities within that building. So if the owner occupied, they live in the farmhouse, but they remodel their barn to allow
They have to run
living
plumbing.
facilities. They just make sure if they have plumbing, yeah. So you could do that as a owner occupied
In Peninsula.
in Peninsula.
But at the same time, as a commission right now, we're kind of split on, all right, where are we going with owner occupied versus?
Right.
Peninsula says 741.04 accessory buildings. No short-term home renters shall be permitted to sleep in any accessory building to the primary building, nor
Owner
shall be
occupied.
permitted.
Look under owner occupied.
Oh, the owner occupied bed and breakfast, they allow it, not in the short-term.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, since we are going to continue this discussion for the next meeting, this was just my thought process. If there's anyone that has any comments at this time, that's fine. If you want to take it home and think about it more, that's fine as well, so that we can move efficiently through this, because I have a pretty long laundry list of items to get to, and I know I want to reserve some time for Mr. Manley to fill us in on the steering committee. So are there any comments with respect to that now before, or do you just want to revisit it next time, hopefully after you've had an opportunity to digest it, and feel free to craft your own language? And
I'm definitely going to want to read through the ones that you provided. This is Independence? Peninsula, I'm sorry. So I'm definitely going to want to read through Peninsula, because I'm seeing some things in here that I like.
Yeah.
And I want to see whether or not we can implement.
Perfect.
Peninsula is very tight, but it looks very regulated as well.
And they are a village, so they have more opportunities to regulate than we do. So just for the public's knowledge, and then I'll if you have any other comments, I'll go through the J, which is again within the section 7.5, which is for the conditional use permit. We similarly have that no renter shall be permitted to sleep in any accessory building in section 6R1 and 6R2 districts. Again, that's a little different than the peninsula language. No renter shall be permitted to sleep outside or in tents, campers, or other similar temporary structures. That's the same as the previous limitation. The maximum number of renters to be accommodated shall be equal to the number of bedrooms occupied by renters multiplied by a factor of 2. That's the same limitation as I previously read. The owner shall retain and upon request make available to the township zoning inspector or law enforcement officials records to demonstrate compliance with this section, including but not limited to primary residency of renter, the name of the renter responsible for the reservation and or who rented the unit each night, dates of the rental, and duration of the stay in the short-term owner-occupied dwelling rental. That's the exact same other than the change of owner-occupied as the prior section. The only additional limitation I put in the owner-occupied, which is the bed and breakfast, is that no more than 5 bedrooms may be occupied by renters at one time. That's again to get out of the situation where the bed and breakfast effectively becomes a hotel. So that 5 bedrooms is just a number that I've worked out that would allow for effectively 10 people, 5 bedrooms times 2 people in the rental, and I think that's approximate size of maybe a large home. You could look to expand that a little bit if you have some thoughts, or maybe you don't like that limitation at all, but that was just to try to distinguish a bed and breakfast from a hotel. Any initial comments before we table and discuss next time? Good. Perfect. And all of you have both of these things in your email. I sent this in January, I think. So I think you should have both these documents also in email. Mr. Bishop, begin with your author. Thank you. Have a great one. You too. Chairman's report. I said I had a somewhat lengthy one, so I apologize in advance. First of all, last night's meeting was somewhat chaotic, and in what happened, I failed to thank Mr. Marzullo for your guidance and leadership over the past year. So I just wanted to make sure I expressed to you how much that meant to me. I think you did a great job steering this commission through the last year, through some text amendments and through some challenging items that came before this commission. So thank you for that. Email policy. So my email address has been posted to the website, and following Mr. Marzullo's lead, if an email is sent to me, I'm going to try to avoid responding to the email just because I think that it's good to have a public discussion about whatever the item is to be addressed. I have been forwarding to the zoning commission members all of the emails that I thought were pertinent to the zoning commission so that they also have the opportunity to read the same things that I'm reading so that they have the same knowledge that I do coming into the meetings about any of the topics at hand. I don't think that there's, I also should say with respect to the emails that I don't intend to read out the emails like Mr. Marzullo did. Again, since I'm having the emails forwarded to the full commission, they're already seeing those emails. And I personally just found that took a significant length of time at our meetings. And I thought that just by providing it to the commission, they could form their own opinions on the emails. The agenda, you'll notice a small change to the agenda in that in the old business section, we used to have a subject matter list, and that would list 4, 5, 6 items that we intended to discuss. This time I did away with the subject matter list. I moved it to another ongoing list of items that we can discuss. The reason that I did that is because for the February meeting, which was canceled, I started to refine that based upon Mr. Spellman had asked, I think, what does a multifamily agenda item mean? And so I broke that down into 3 items. And then after I had posted that agenda, I started to think about the purpose of the agenda and the potential confusion that that agenda would cause in that when I broke that down, one of the items that we had on there was apartments. One of the items that we had on there was senior housing. And realistically, we weren't going to get to those agenda items in the February meeting, and we weren't going to get to them today. So what I wanted to do is make the agenda an accurate depiction of what we're going to discuss at this meeting, not an ongoing list of items that we hope to discuss at some point in the future. So I've removed some items from the agenda. Again, it's not to say that we won't discuss those, and I have every intent to get to those. It's just that I knew we would not be able to get to them today, so I took them off the agenda. And then as we're able to squeeze those in, and I hope to achieve, fit those into our agenda for a certain meeting, I'll add them back to the meeting. Each of you received, go ahead, Mr.
Quick question. So I think it's a good idea to keep a backlog like that, keep it groomed, just not to cloud this up. Is it possible you can share that periodically with the group here? Things that aren't in my face, I tend to forget about, but it's nice just to see, okay, these are the things that we thought of so far, to get to.
I can create a Google Doc and then I can share. And then as we modify it, you guys can see it. All that I request on that is we've got to be mindful of the open meeting laws. And so we don't want to start making comments on that agenda or that subject matter list that would ultimately result in a potentially, backdoor meeting just inadvertently through comments. So I know that a bunch of us just received sunshine law training. And so we just need to be mindful of that. When you see the list, it's not for us to start commenting on the list, and since it's not a meeting.
I'd be happy with read-only access.
Less tempting.
That's right.
So payroll, the township is getting into the 21st century. I provided to each of you a form for us for you to be paid electronically. So Martha doesn't care how frequently we get paid. She just wants to make sure that we're getting paid electronically as opposed to by checks. So I propose doing a direct deposit twice per year. Is anyone opposed to receiving their pay twice a year?
You mean instead of once?
Instead of once. We can do it monthly. We can do it quarterly. I don't think that the frequency of pay is
it doesn't
too
matter to me.
significant. So that's why I
Whatever's
push it
easier.
back. Okay. So I'll inform Martha that twice a year is fine. Each of you had a form. If you can just fill out that form and return it at the next meeting, I'll seal them up in an envelope and provide them to Martha so that she can get that process set up. Conditional use. There is a conditional use application that has been in front of you. That is for Martial Arts Center, and let me pull it up. I think it is for
Jiu-jitsu.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
That's in. Do you have it in front of you? I think it's for the industrial.
It is.
Right?
It is.
Yeah.
And so we conditionally allow indoor recreation in the industrial district. And so within that definition, we don't necessarily have martial arts, but it seems close enough. But the BZA will hear the conditional use and make a decision. I don't think that there's anything else to that. Are there any comments or concerns with the conditional use request? Perfect. That hearing is set, I think, for March 23rd for the conditional use for the martial arts. Oh, with the BZA, correct. Do they move it?
I have it here. The inspection's March 5 and the public hearing is March 9th. Is this, is that changed? That's what I'm reading here.
So they've approved moving to then March.
The applicant. is-
So March 9th.
Yes.
Okay, so it is March 9th.
Yeah.
Thank you. So last night, Hinckley had two things in front of the Planning Commission, Serenity Court, which is a proposal for 16 homes on the, I think it's a 60-acre plot directly off of 303 across from Arborcrest neighborhood. So 15 of those a street with 15 of the sublots connected to it would tap into 303. The 16th sublot, which is a 20-acre sublot, would connect to Don Pree, which is in the Country Brook community. And so if you recall, last year they made a proposal and they had actually had it flipped so that I think it was 13 or 14 homes at that point would connect to Don Pree, and the 20-acre plot would connect to 303. Based upon the concerns of the residents of Country Brook predominantly, my understanding is that they flipped it so that most of the homes are now connected directly to 303. The preliminary plan was submitted to the Planning Commission and heard at last night's meeting. That plan was conditionally approved. We've not received a preliminary site plan yet for review. So if and when they submit that application, we'll review it at the time. However, I think in your packet of material, you do have the Planning Commission's report.
Right.
The Planning Commission also heard the final site review for the senior housing project, and that was also conditionally approved. They have not submitted a final site plan for review by this commission yet, so I would assume that they will do so in the next month or so, so that will probably be on our agenda for next month. Any questions on that item or those two items? Mr. Manley, and I'll try to share my screen.
Okay. Well,
So,
the steering committee's had two meetings.
not on that. Sorry, I'm not there yet.
Oh,
I have another item for you.
okay.
I'm going to try to share my screen.
Is that regarding the minutes that you handed me?
Correct.
I can't confirm whether I was here or not. I'd have to see my schedule at home.
I don't think that that's what we need you to confirm. Let me again try to share my screen. Okay, so a resident of Hinckley noticed that on the 8/5 public hearing, on the 8/5 regular meeting, and on the 8/12 special meeting, you had abstained from the vote as not being present. However, you signed those minutes.
Correct.
On the left side is your signature with just a D. Manley.
Mhm.
On the right side is your signature with David Manley. There was some concern as to whether you indeed did sign the 8/5 minutes. So I just wanted to confirm that the 8/5 where you signed it, D. Manley, is your signature. It looks like it is. I just, for the record.
Yeah, the 12th and the 5th is definitely, and you say one of them.
There were two on the 5th and one on the 12th.
Okay, I don't see where I signed on, I thought I signed them all,
No, I pulled up one from, because I went back and looked too, because I had no idea.
Well, the three I'm looking at here are
Yeah,
signed.
all three of those. If you look up on the screen, I did one that's not.
So what do we, if I signed it, I signed it.
Correct. They just wanted to confirm that that was your signature. And also, because you were absent, when you look at this one signature, you signed it and circled absent. So I'd assume you were just signing to acknowledge that you were absent.
Probably.
Okay.
I don't,
Perfect. So we can confirm that those were indeed your signatures is really
yes.
Thank you.
The residents are checking.
They're being mindful of that. Can you take away my screen? I don't know how to stop sharing. Maybe pause share. Thank you. All right, you will see that we still do not have an alternate zoning commission member. The township trustees have decided to, at least for the time being, have one alternate to the zoning commission and one alternate to the BZA. So resumes were collected, interviews were interviews held. The trustees, I believe, had selected someone for our commission to fill that alternate role. They ultimately decided not to proceed with accepting the offer. And so the township is proceeding for the third time with the collection of resumes to fill this position. Any resumes are due by March 16th. And again, that's for an alternate position with our zoning commission for a term that will end at the end of the year. Any questions on that item? No. Perfect. Liaison to the BZA. So the township trustees have agreed to allow the BZA to have a liaison to attend our meetings, and that would be at the request of me, and for us to have a liaison to attend the BZA meetings, and that would be at the request of the chair of the BZA. This would not be on an ongoing concern. It would be at times where we felt it might be beneficial for the BZA member to see what we're doing. Perhaps we have something that we think there's going to be the need for a variance. And so they might come to our meeting to start to understand what we're doing and why we might think that there's a variance, or there might be an item that the BZA is discussing that's going to come before us. And so having a liaison at that meeting to listen in and to report back to this commission. They are paid for that. You know, I think they approved for the $25. But at this time, I would like to have a nomination for a liaison. And again, we can send someone outside of our liaison, but I'd like to just have someone to, be named the liaison. And if that person can't serve for whatever reason for a certain meeting, we can select someone else. But I'd like to have an ongoing liaison for that. So are there any nominations?
You want to do it? I nominate me.
Second?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Perfect. Congratulations. I think I am complete. So thank you for listening to all of my agenda items. Board member reports. I know Mr. Manley has a report, so we'll start with him and then we'll go down the line and any other board members have a report. They're free to go.
All right, as I started to mention before, there's been 2 public meetings. There's 15 people, I believe, at the first meeting and 14 at the second meeting. They're basically, in general, at both meetings, it's obvious of the people attending, they don't want the city water, they don't want sewers, they want everything left the way it is. Apartment buildings are a no-no under any conditions. The conservation districts don't, it seems like some of them want them eliminated, some of them want the regulations modified. I think they're having trouble understanding the yield plan and all that might be in them. But it was definite that they basically what it amounts to is they do not want another conservation district that ends up looking like the Redwood group. We've had discussions at both meetings. What does rural really means? Everybody has their own definitions, but in many cases it boils down to less traffic, at least 2 or 3 acre lots, and no further development except where we have to do it. It's been accepted that Hinckley is a bedroom community, but Hinckley is unique and it's not a suburb. Many want the town center spruced up, but no one can offer what type of business could be located there, and they haven't taken into consideration that earlier they said they don't want city water or city sewers. A lot of complaints about excess traffic on 303. As many of you may know, a lot of that traffic is moving from Brunswick and west to the east side and back again, not necessarily Hinckley traffic. There's several suggestions that the comprehensive plan should include financial information, and for the life of me, I can't figure out what exactly they want. That several people have mentioned that. And last but not least, they want the developers to be held more responsible to leave trees. Any tree they destroy has to be replaced, and several would like to require homeowners to plant, at least in one case, up to 10 trees. Basically, that's it. Our next meeting is this month, the 29th of March. The final meeting will be the 26th of April, and then there's a hearing, public hearing. Also, there's a scuttlebutt going around that some folks, and I don't know how many of these people at these two meetings, because it hasn't come up, are unhappy with the makeup of the planning commission, and they want to redo it, and I don't know whether it's a case they want to add more members in the middle of it or start from scratch. I have no idea, but that's being floated around. So
That's being floated around of the steering committee?
no,
Oh,
it's floating around people around, just giving you an overview of the whole thing. I really don't have much detail on the little bits I see in here. But anyhow, the steering committee is basically listening, and I do think that even though most of the people here have their own agenda before they walked in the door, most of them, I think, are open to the plan as presented or as there now is pretty good. They'd like it tweaked in certain places. And how that's done, it's from the steering committee, is too early to tell. Not sure what the final thing would be. And if there's any question, if I can, I'll answer it. Next meeting, we're going to try and develop a questionnaire to get out to the public. How it's going to be distributed to the public. It appears it's going to be electronically to Facebook, etc. I'm not sure what the final thing will be on that, but there will be some kind of questionnaire to the general public. That's it.
when they said they don't want it developed, are you speaking housing developments? Are you speaking commercial development?
They don't want any housing. They don't want any further business developments. Again, I'm just giving you an overview of the different comments. And when there was at least two people, I made comments when at least two people were basically on the same road, so to speak. And it's hard to tell because when you talk to them, it's like keeping Hinckley rural. You know, what it comes down to in some cases is the people live around 303 and they can't get out in the morning to go to work because there's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of traffic on 3. And sometimes that's the basis for this thing. And, you know, and they think maybe that if we had 4 or 5 acre lots, maybe that would cut the traffic down, but it doesn't. These are through streets. They're state highways. They're moving people from one section of the county to another county. And how do we overcome that? I don't know.
I don't think, please correct me if I'm wrong, you started to formulate the questions that are going to be presented.
We're supposed to come to our next meeting with the kind of questions we want. Then it's going to be opened up to the 13, 14, 15, whoever it is, people to, you know, kind of get from them and try to put them together. Because hopefully they don't come up with more than 8 or 10 questions. I think if you get too many questions, it's going to lose its effectiveness.
I hope one of the things that you're able to do, and one of the things that you can bring to the table is your knowledge of this resolution and educating both the steering committee and the public on what the current resolution is. Because I think even within the Redwood Falls, for instance, we've had significant changes to our resolution since then. And I think that we need to be mindful of what the resolution is as we formulate the questions. And so I'm wondering if you've had an opportunity at all to discuss some of the changes that have taken place in various
areas.
Yes, there's been discussion trying to explain the yield plan, and I think we're, and it's a problem we face all the time, and you face it here too, is that they came from Parma, and Parma can do this, or in many cases, somebody was talking about a city in Florida where it's a horseback riding community where, I have a $3 million house and you have to have 5 acres and all kind of thing, and you ride your horse up to it. But they don't understand the city. They talk about Hudson, how wonderful it is. They have all these rules and regulations. Well, try to drive through there with the houses on top of one another. I mean, they don't understand that the township is this, and the village is this, and the city is this, that has home rule is this. They just, you don't want to say, hey, you're stupid, they're not stupid. They just don't understand. These are all different forms of government. And, the schools don't teach this in any way, shape, or form. And there, in my opinion, lies much of the problem. That they just don't understand that there's things we can't do. Like 1 or 2 people complain, why don't we have noise ordinances? Well, it's not that easy. So.
And I think
we're working at it. We're working at it. I mean,
right? And we had to
but I should say
part of the educational component that
I appreciate, but you only have so much time.
Right. Right.
But the meetings have been good. They've been on a very professional level from everybody involved, even though there's differences of opinion, serious differences of opinion in some cases. Everybody's been they've been good. They've been good about treating people like adults and listening to their very few times have people been interrupted. They're going along. It's a shame it's only 4 meetings. Maybe it should have been 6 or 8, but it's what it is. What it is. Yeah. How do you do this? I don't know. I was always hopeful that through the trustees column that the different trustees write at the times, and they did a little bit with the garbage thing, but if they get into some of these differences and nuances, maybe what they ought to do. I don't know, is Melissa here somewhere? Maybe what they ought to do is let you write a column one time and touch on.
Oh, I'll let you write the column.
No.
I'll send the name to your column.
Or in the BZA and even Tom Wilson. I mean, maybe that would, assuming they would read it, and I would hope they would. Some do. There's no question some people do. But anyhow, it's moving along. That's the best I can say to you.
First, I can for 1 second. Mr. Manley did at the last meeting explain how particularly a conservation district, how some of the rules and regs have changed. So he did address it at the last meeting, took the time. I think it opened some people's eyes.
And I think that is so true, that most of the folks who are still angry and complaining don't understand the changes that have been made so that same errors don't happen again, right?
And one other point of clarity, OHM will develop the survey. Everybody's making suggestions, but the survey will be created by them, not by the committee. All will be suggestions given to them.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Manley, for volunteering to be part of this. I think it's a tremendous asset for one of us to be on that. Mm-hmm. Anything else from Mr.
No, not for me.
Perfect. Ms. Crew?
I don't have anything. No, but you know what? I do have just one little gripe.
Told me you didn't have anything. We're moving on already. No, go ahead.
So it was recorded today, but I was unaware that change was made. So our meeting is being recorded?
Our meeting has always been recorded. But I mean that it's now, so we are going to open it up to the public to comment.
The comments, yes. I'm sorry, that it's it's open, soon as FEMA. And commission members can attend via Zoom. Mm-hmm. Okay. How is that going to be passed on to all of us? That information. Was that going to come from your chair's report?
It was.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. But preferably, I think it's still desirable for everyone to be here to engage in the dialogue physically. Obviously, if you can't, you can attend virtually. But I think the preference is still, if possible, to make it to the meeting. Mr. Marzullo?
Had another records request submitted. It was Honestly, I don't even remember what it was. It was back in January. It was about text messages, emails, communications, any sorts of phone calls between myself and Jim Larson, myself and Trustee Asherle, and myself and anyone about anything having to do with Hinckley Township zoning commission business.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else?
That's it.
No? Mr. Spellman?
Appreciate the update on the that you give, Mr. Manley. Education amongst ourselves, the public, is always going to be a crux of an issue. This stuff is not simple. It's very complex. That's one comment. And a second comment is it's interesting that there's varying definitions of the word rural. I'm curious what the consensus is on the definition at the end of this.
There was no consensus there. I mean, some people objected to the quote bedroom community, but they didn't have any alternative.
Well,
And other people agreed that by definition, a bedroom community is you live someplace and work somewhere else. But there's just no, and I don't think it's really that important. As what is a rural community? It could be anything you want, I guess.
It could be, but when you go around the township and we make statements like we want to keep Hinckley Township rural, it's good to have, to me, it's good to have a definition. It helps us as a zoning commission see what is the view of Hinckley. So that's my second comment. Last comment is when it comes to keeping Hinckley rural, I think there's no better option than conservation of the land. There's lots of different options out there for those that have the larger tracts of land. Western Reserve Land Conservancy is a great place to start. So just kind of a PSA, if somebody's interested in that, just even hearing about it, they've got a lot of very good material that they can provide and are willing to talk to people.
And I think that there was a meeting last year, a presentation late last year on that as well. So kudos to the township for trying to encourage that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's all.
Thank you. And I will say, I think that, listening in on the steering commission meetings, I think his name is Arthur, correct? Arthur from OHM. I think one of the things that he reiterated numerous times is that the definition of rural can be whatever we want it to be, but we should come up with some sort of definition for what that is. And so we'll see if that's a product of this audit or not. But that was something that he did mention numerous times is figure out what that means.
Agreed.
So, thank you. There's nothing else from the commission. Trustee Augustine, do you have anything? Trustee Sloidic is also on, so if he wants to raise his hand and make any comments, that's fine.
I just have two things. One is the virtual system was approved by Governor DeWine until June 30th of this year. So we'll allow for comments from our virtual attendees just until the end of June. And the second thing is in unison kind of what you were just talking about. If you have definition of rural that you would like to share with me, pass on to the steering committee, I would love to entertain it. That's all.
Thank you. I don't know how someone raises their hand. So did trustees?
All you have to do is say if you have anything,
Well, I'm going to do public soon. I just want to make sure the trustee didn't have anything before.
No, he didn't raise his hand.
Perfect. All right. If there are any comments from the public, either here or online, if you're online attending virtually, just raise your hand and you're welcome to make comments at this time. All that we ask is that you speak clearly and you state your name and address for the record. No one, go ahead.
Just very briefly, Lindsay Rubel, 925 Stony Hill Road in Hinckley, Ohio. Just wanted to comment, going back to the short-term rental, there's a comment made if there are continuous short-term rentals in succession, that's going to be considered a commercial use. And in fact, that is not the case. There is case law in Ohio. I'm not purporting to give a legal opinion to the township, but I would recommend that there's a 6th district case. If you look back on that, it does say that a short-term rental, even if 7 days or less, is considered to be a residential use unless the regulations within that municipality consider it to be a commercial use. So I just wanted to make a point on that issue.
And I think when I was, if you're using my language, I don't know if it was mine or not, but what I was trying to say is that a short-term rental at some point can become more akin to a business. And so it makes sense to make it conditional as opposed to, permitted.
Absolutely agreed. And then the last point I just wanted to make on the short-term rental, I think when the commission decided that this was one of the issues that we were going to tackle, we're talking about like the catastrophic situation. So we're talking about the people next door have decided that this is going to be an Airbnb. They allow these ragers to be thrown every weekend. And the issue is, if we don't have any regulation in place, we have nothing to enforce. So let's be proactive about tackling it now instead of waiting until it really becomes an issue. And Mr. Wilson has no teeth to try to enforce. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Any hands raised? Perfect. So if there's nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn at 8:53 p.m. Moved by Marzullo.
I'll say.
Seconded by Crew. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Wonderful.